Heathrow Airport, April 8, 1968. A calm spring afternoon turned into a nightmare that no one would ever forget. A BOAC Boeing 707 roars through the skies, its passengers unaware that within minutes, their flight will become the center of a terrifying spectacle seen by hundreds on the ground. Flames erupt midair, streaking across the calm London sky like a scene from a disaster film. What began as an ordinary flight bound for Sydney soon became a desperate struggle for survival and a story of extraordinary bravery that would forever mark one name in aviation history. I'm John, and this is Plane Crash. It was supposed to be a routine departure for BOAC Flight 712, a Boeing 707 bound for Sydney, Australia, with planned stops along the way. On board were more than 100 passengers, each with their own stories, destinations, and dreams. Some were business travelers returning home, others families beginning new adventures, and a handful of tourists simply enjoying the excitement of international travel. The aircraft itself was a proud symbol of Britain's global reach, part of the BOAC fleet that represented the golden age of aviation in the 1960s, a time when air travel still held a touch of glamour and prestige. The crew that day were highly skilled professionals. Captain Clifford Taylor sat in command, a veteran pilot with thousands of flight hours logged across various aircraft types. His first officer, Francis Kirkland, was equally capable, and their flight engineer, Thomas Hicks, was known for his calm composure and technical precision. Together they formed a team that understood each other well, their training and discipline allowing them to handle even the most unexpected challenges. As the sun filtered through the partly cloudy afternoon sky over Heathrow, the Boeing 707 taxied confidently toward runway 28R. The engines roared to life. The smell of aviation fuel hung in the air, and passengers felt that familiar surge of anticipation that comes just before takeoff. Inside the cabin, flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, checking seatbelts, closing overhead bins, and reassuring nervous travelers. Among them was a young woman named Barbara Jane Harrison, just 22 years old, bright, poised, and dedicated to her work. For many of the passengers, this flight was just another chapter in their lives, but for Barbara and her fellow crew members, it was another day committed to safety and service in the sky. At 3:27 p.m., Captain Taylor pushed the throttles forward. The Boeing 707 accelerated smoothly down the runway, its four engines delivering a combined thrust that lifted the 150,000-kilogram jet effortlessly into the air. Heathrow's terminal building shrank below, and the plane began its steady climb toward the open blue. For a few moments, everything was perfect, the gentle hum of the engines, the faint clinking of teacups as flight attendants began preparing for the initial service, and the captain's calm voice over the intercom announcing their climb and cruising altitude. But tranquility in aviation can be fragile, shattered in an instant by forces that no human hand can control. Barely 4 minutes after takeoff, as the jet reached about 3,000 feet, a sudden loud explosion echoed through the cabin. The passengers gasped. Some screamed. Those seated near the left side of the aircraft looked out their windows in horror. A sheet of orange flame erupted from the number 2 engine, the inboard engine on the left wing. The smooth hum of flight was replaced by a deep, vibrating rumble, and the entire aircraft began to shake violently. In the cockpit, the pilots instantly recognized what had happened. Engine number 2 had suffered a catastrophic failure. A compressor disc had likely disintegrated, sending fragments of red-hot metal tearing through the wing and fuselage. Those fragments severed vital hydraulic and fuel lines, causing fuel to leak into the already burning engine. In seconds, the fire began spreading along the wing's surface. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The smell of smoke seeped through the cabin ventilation system. Captain Taylor's voice remained steady as he radioed Heathrow's control tower. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday BOAC 712, engine fire, request immediate return. His training kicked in. He and Kirkland ran through emergency procedures, shutting off fuel to the burning engine, engaging fire suppression systems, and trying to feather the propeller blades to reduce drag. But the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Despite the extinguishers being activated, the fire refused to die. The damage to the wing structure was far more severe than they could have known in those early moments. Passengers began to cry, some clutching one another, others sitting frozen in disbelief. Smoke was now visible inside parts of the cabin. Flight attendants moved swiftly through the aisles, calming those in panic, securing loose items, and preparing the passengers for an emergency landing. Barbara Harrison was among them, her composure remarkable despite the chaos. She reassured frightened children, fastened seatbelts, and gave clear, firm instructions to stay seated and remain calm. The pilots, meanwhile, fought to stabilize the aircraft. The Boeing 707 was designed to fly safely on 3 engines, but the fire on the left wing was compromising the aircraft's aerodynamic balance. Taylor kept his focus on the instruments, his eyes scanning rapidly between airspeed, altitude, and fire indicators. Heathrow's air traffic controllers cleared all other planes from the area, giving BOAC Flight 712 priority to return. Emergency vehicles were already scrambling into position on the runway. The airport fell into tense silence as the burning jet began its slow turn back toward London. From the ground, witnesses could see the flames trailing from the wing, an orange streak cutting through the pale blue sky. Many thought the plane might not make it back at all. In the cabin, the tension was unbearable. Every minute seemed longer than the last. The cabin crew kept up their efforts, encouraging passengers to remain calm while discreetly preparing them for the impact they knew was coming. The acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Some passengers began coughing, covering their faces with handkerchiefs. Still, the aircraft held together as it descended, though the fire continued to rage. Captain Taylor's voice came over the intercom again, steady but urgent. "Cabin crew, prepare for emergency landing." Those words were enough to send another wave of fear through the passengers. The descent toward Heathrow was swift. Pilots coordinated every move with ground control, keeping their communications short and precise. The approach path brought them over suburban West London, and people in gardens and parks below could clearly see the plane, its left wing blackened with smoke. Pieces of burning debris occasionally breaking away and falling to the ground. On the flight deck, Taylor and Kirkland had to fight the aircraft's tendency to roll left due to the destroyed engine. Hicks monitored the systems, trying to isolate the damage as best as possible. They knew the left wing structure was weakened and could fail at any time. Yet, they managed to line up perfectly for a landing on runway 05. At this point, only a few minutes had passed since the explosion, but to those on board, it felt like an eternity. The pilots brought the jet down as gently as they could, flaps extended, landing gear down. Smoke poured past the windows as the ground rushed up to meet them. At 3:38 p.m., the Boeing 707 touched down at Heathrow. The moment the wheels hit the runway, relief swept through the cockpit, but that relief was tragically short-lived. The instant the aircraft decelerated, the airflow feeding the engine fire reduced, allowing the flames to surge up into the fuselage and ignite leaking fuel. The fire that had clung stubbornly to the wing now spread in a terrifying burst along the left side of the aircraft. The pilots applied brakes and thrust reversers on the remaining engines to bring the aircraft to a stop as quickly as possible. Emergency crews raced alongside, but within seconds, fire was engulfing the cabin. From her jump seat near the rear of the plane, Barbara Harrison could already see the smoke thickening. The captain ordered an immediate evacuation. The situation was critical, but the full extent of the damage was still hidden by the smoke and flames. The cabin doors were opened, slides deployed, and passengers began to pour out into the chaos, some screaming, some too stunned to move. The fire was now spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. Within moments, the entire left side of the aircraft was ablaze. The heat was so intense that metal began to warp and windows melted. Even though rescue crews were now at the scene, they could do little to contain the flames that licked at the fuselage like a living thing. In the cockpit, Captain Taylor and his crew evacuated through their exits, shouting for passengers to move clear of the aircraft. But inside, toward the rear, Harrison remained focused on her duty. Despite being surrounded by smoke, she guided terrified passengers toward the emergency exit, pushing them down the slide, ignoring her own safety. For those brief minutes after landing, every decision, every movement mattered. The pilot's skill and calm under pressure had saved the plane from crashing outright, bringing it back to the ground in one piece, a feat many would later describe as miraculous. Yet, the combination of mechanical failure, structural damage, and the relentless fire left almost no margin for survival once the aircraft had stopped. What had begun as a simple engine fire in flight had now become a race against time, and though the landing was successful, the true test of courage was only just beginning. The sequence of failures that led to the fire would later be traced to an improperly installed engine combustion, CAN, a maintenance issue that caused vibrations leading to catastrophic disintegration. But in that moment, no one knew the cause, and no one cared. Every thought was focused solely on survival. On the observation deck, people like Colleen Mahan watched in stunned silence as the flaming aircraft slowed down and came to rest at the edge of the runway. Seconds later, an explosion ripped through the plane, sending a plume of black smoke into the sky. For those watching, it was a horrifying spectacle. For those inside, it was chaos and terror beyond imagination. Yet amidst that terror, the human spirit refused to break. The pilots, the cabin crew, the emergency teams on the ground, all acted with a precision and courage that would later be recognized around the world. The first chapter of BOAC Flight 712 story was not only one of mechanical failure and catastrophe, but also one of human resilience, the calm professionalism that kept the aircraft in the sky long enough to reach safety. It was proof that even in the face of disaster, discipline, teamwork, and sheer determination could make the difference between life and death. As the crippled Boeing 707 descended toward Heathrow, a hush seemed to fall over everything below. The blue London sky was torn by a trail of thick, oily smoke, flames licking from the left wing as the massive jet limped through the air. On the ground, motorists stopped their cars, pedestrians froze in disbelief, and those near the airport looked up, realizing something terrible was unfolding before their eyes. The sound of the engines was uneven, desperate, a wounded bird fighting to stay aloft. Inside the cockpit, Captain Clifford Taylor and his crew were locked in a tense struggle against time and physics. Their concentration was absolute, their training and instincts guiding them through every second. Despite the chaos, their voices remained calm, measured, each command executed with precision. Taylor's focus was to get the aircraft back to the runway. The fire continued to devour the wing, and the damaged structure was threatening to give way. But somehow, through incredible airmanship and discipline, they managed to maintain control long enough to align with the runway. Below, emergency vehicles stood ready, fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue crews lining the tarmac in anticipation of what might come next. It was 3:38 p.m. when BOAC Flight 712 finally touched down. The aircraft landed hard but stable, smoke billowing from the burning engine. The wheels screeched, tires tore into the asphalt, and the passengers were jolted in their seats. A wave of relief rippled through the cabin. They were on the ground, they had made it. But that relief lasted mere seconds. As soon as the plane decelerated, the airflow that had been suppressing the fire was lost, and the flames erupted with renewed fury, spreading rapidly across the left wing and fuselage. The heat intensified in an instant. The pilots could feel it from the cockpit windows, the glare of the fire reflecting against the glass. Taylor brought the plane to a halt at the edge of the runway, yelling over the intercom, "Evacuate! Evacuate!" Those words ignited a frenzy of movement inside the cabin. Flight attendants leapt into action, opening doors, deploying slides, and shouting commands. Smoke poured into the cabin, thick and choking, blinding those inside. People coughed violently, their eyes stinging. Some passengers panicked, trying to grab their belongings, while others froze, unable to move. Amid this chaos stood 22-year-old flight attendant Barbara Jane Harrison. Positioned near the rear of the aircraft, she was faced with the most intense part of the fire. The left side of the fuselage was already ablaze, and flames were seeping through the cabin walls. Yet she didn't hesitate. She shouted above the noise, guiding passengers toward the rear exit, her voice cutting through the smoke and terror. "Come this way, hurry! Leave everything!" she called, pulling people toward the emergency slide. Outside, the fire crews were racing closer, but the heat was so intense that they could barely approach. The burning jet spewed flames skyward, black smoke curling into the clouds. For those watching from the terminal and observation deck, it was a scene straight from a nightmare. As passengers reached the exits, flight attendants pushed them down the slides. Some were injured, some disoriented, but Barbara stayed at her post, helping one person after another. She refused to leave even as smoke filled her lungs and her uniform began to scorch. Witnesses later recalled how she physically pushed people down the slide, shouting encouragement even as the flames grew higher. A passenger later described seeing her silhouetted against the fire, still at the door, her hair and clothes singed, waving people toward safety. Inside the cockpit, Captain Taylor and his crew were among the last to leave the forward section. They could hear the explosions of burning fuel tanks and see the left wing collapsing in on itself. They knew that every second counted, but Barbara's courage in the rear was giving others precious moments to escape. The inferno spread with horrifying speed. The fire had breached the fuselage near the rear doors, cutting off Barbara's route of escape. Yet she didn't run. She stayed to help one last passenger, believed to be trapped or too frightened to move. A sudden blast ripped through the aircraft as the fire reached the center fuel tanks. The explosion was deafening, the shockwave rolling across the tarmac. When it cleared, the rear section of the plane was engulfed completely, flames rising hundreds of feet into the air. Barbara Harrison never made it out. Her body was later found near the doorway where she had been helping others. She had given her life trying to save as many passengers as possible. The scene at Heathrow that day was one of devastation. Firefighters fought desperately to contain the blaze, dousing the wreckage with foam and water. The aircraft was reduced to a charred skeleton within minutes. Thick black smoke blanketed the area. Emergency personnel worked tirelessly, pulling survivors from the debris and treating burns and injuries on the spot. In all, 5 people lost their lives, including Barbara. But her actions had saved countless others. Dozens of passengers who might have perished in the smoke and flames escaped because of her bravery. In the aftermath, investigators began piecing together the events that had led to the catastrophe. They found that the No. 2 engine had suffered a severe turbine failure caused by a fatigue crack in a combustor can, which maintenance crews had overlooked. When the engine exploded, it sent metal fragments slicing through hydraulic and fuel lines, igniting an uncontrollable fire. Despite the pilot's best efforts and the immediate activation of the fire suppression system, the flames continued to burn. The damage to the wing structure had made the fire nearly impossible to extinguish in flight. The investigation also highlighted the incredible composure and professionalism of the flight crew, whose swift decisions and coordinated teamwork prevented an even greater disaster. Their ability to bring the aircraft back to Heathrow, control the descent, and execute a landing despite a raging fire was nothing short of extraordinary. But above all, it was Barbara Harrison's story that captured the hearts of the public. Newspapers across Britain and the world carried her photograph, her youthful face and kind eyes, and described her final acts of heroism in vivid detail. She became a national symbol of courage, selflessness, and duty. The British government posthumously awarded her the George Cross, the highest honor for civilian bravery. The citation read that she displayed the highest possible degree of heroism in the face of almost certain death. It was the first time in history that such an award had been given to a female flight attendant. In the months that followed, her name became synonymous with courage in aviation. BOAC erected a memorial in her honor, and her colleagues remembered her not just as a hero, but as a friend, kind, cheerful, and always devoted to her work. Survivors of the crash often spoke of her final moments, saying that without her calmness and leadership, many more would have died. Even decades later, Barbara's story remains one of the most powerful examples of bravery in the face of unimaginable fear. The tragedy of Flight 712 also left lasting lessons for the aviation industry. Safety procedures were re-evaluated, emergency training for flight attendants was expanded, and aircraft design was scrutinized to ensure better protection against in-flight engine fires. The incident became a case study for engineers and pilots around the world, a reminder of how quickly disaster can strike and how vital every second of response time can be. For Heathrow Airport, that spring day in 1968 would never be forgotten. The image of the burning Boeing 707, captured in photographs and news footage, haunted the public consciousness for years. Yet within that horror was a story of humanity at its purest, the story of a young woman who chose duty over survival, compassion over fear. Witnesses remembered her not as a victim, but as a light amid the darkness, her courage cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Captain Taylor and his crew were later commended for their skill and professionalism, but all of them would agree that Barbara was the true hero of that day. They described her bravery with awe, knowing that she had done what few could face certain death to save others. When the wreckage was finally cleared from Heathrow's tarmac, the airport returned to its usual rhythm of departures and arrivals. Planes once again filled the skies, and life moved on. But for those who had been there, for those who had seen the inferno or survived, nothing was ever the same. Every time a jet roared overhead, it carried with it the unspoken memory of BOAC Flight 712, and of the young woman who gave her life so that others might live. The legacy of that flight is more than a tragic chapter in aviation history. It is a testament to the strength of human character under the most extreme conditions. It reminds us that technology and training, while vital, are only part of what keeps people safe. The other part, the most crucial part, is courage, the kind that burns brighter than any flame. Barbara Harrison's name remains engraved in the annals of aviation, not because of the way she died, but because of how she lived her final moments, with unwavering commitment, compassion, and bravery. In every evacuation drill, in every safety briefing, and in every flight attendant's oath to protect passengers, her spirit endures. Even now, over half a century later, her story continues to inspire generations of flight crews and passengers alike, serving as a powerful reminder that in the heart of tragedy, true heroism shines the brightest dot in the end. BOAC Flight 712 was more than just a tragic accident. It became a defining moment of human courage in the face of catastrophe. The burning wreckage on the runway told a story of loss and survival, of chaos and calm, of fear and bravery intertwined. While investigators pieced together the technical causes behind the disaster, what truly endured was the memory of those who refused to give in to panic of a captain who brought his wounded aircraft safely home, a crew who acted with unshakable professionalism, and a young flight attendant named Barbara Harrison, whose selfless sacrifice turned unimaginable terror into a timeless story of heroism. Her legacy lives on not in the flames that consumed the aircraft, but in the countless lives she saved and the unbreakable spirit of duty she embodied.